December 17, 1944, 530 hours. Honsfeld, Belgium. The Tiger tank's Maybach engine coughed, sputtered, then died. SSOBE or STURMB at NNFH or E or Joachim Peiper slammed his fist against the hatch, frustration ringing in the frozen darkness. His driver tried again, nothing. The fuel gauge read empty, the reserve tank dry. Peiper climbed down, boots crunching on hard Belgian soil. Around him, the most powerful armored spearhead of Operation Watch on the Rhine, 67 tanks, 149 half-trucks, and nearly 5,000 Waffen-SS troops, sat paralyzed. Through the mist he saw Honsfeld, abandoned by the Americans in their retreat. Fires still smoldered in oil drums. Coffee remained hot in tin cups, and lined up in rows like an offering from the god of war, stood thousands of olive-drab jerry cans. His adjutant pried one open, inhaled, and shouted, "High-octane gasoline!" Frenzy erupted as German crews began refueling. Peiper walked among the stacks, counting. The number staggered him. 50,000 gallons, enough to push his battle group to the Meuse River. Enough, perhaps, to change the course of the Ardennes offensive. And yet, as his men poured American fuel into German tanks, realization struck. If the Americans could abandon such a treasure, if they could waste what Germany would guard with divisions, then the war was already lost. Germany had not simply miscalculated, it had misunderstood its enemy. 6 months earlier, Albert Speer had warned Hitler, Germany's synthetic fuel production, lifeblood of the Wehrmacht, had collapsed under Allied bombing. The Luna Works fell from 175,000 tons in April to 5,000 in September. Hydrogenation plants ran at less than 10%. By contrast, in 1940 for the U.S., produced 1.8 billion barrels of oil. Germany managed just 33 million, less than 2%. The Reich was waging mechanized war with horse-drawn logistics. For the Ardennes, Major Friedrich Simon calculated 4.5 million gallons were needed to reach Antwerp. Hitler allocated 5 million, but transport failures halved even that. The plan assumed fuel would be seized from the enemy, a sign of weakness disguised as strategy. Meanwhile, the Americans built miracles of logistics. The Red Ball Express trucking 12,500 tons daily, the Pluto pipeline snaking under the channel. By December, U.S. forces consumed 1.2 million gallons of fuel every day and still stockpiled reserves. Peiper, at 29, one of the Waffen-SS's youngest regimental commanders, knew fuel was more precious than ammunition. His Kampfgruppe had received 31,000 gallons, barely enough for 50 miles. The Meuse lay 65 miles away. From the start, the numbers foretold failure. Orders were strict, single-file advances, engines cut at every halt, American depots priority targets. But progress was slow. On December the 16th, traffic jams and unexpected resistance stalled Peiper's column, burning precious fuel. By the time Honsfeld appeared at dawn the next day, 40% of his allocation was gone after only 20 miles. The depot he stumbled upon was not even a major facility, merely a forward station for the U.S. 99th Infantry Division, yet it held more gasoline than a German Panzer division might see in months. Some soldiers found shipping papers tracing the fuel's journey, Texas oil fields to New York, across the Atlantic, through England, over the Channel, and 400 miles by truck to Honsfeld, in just 6 weeks. Others discovered Stars and Stripes newspapers boasting of new pipelines, delivering 300,000 gallons daily. A single American pipeline moved more fuel in a day than Peiper's force would burn in the entire offensive. Among those towering stacks of gasoline, Peiper understood the Ardennes offensive was already doomed. Germany's tanks were running on borrowed time, while America's war machine drowned in fuel. With the 50,000 gallons seized at Honsfeld, Peiper's columns surged forward. By noon on December the 17th they reached Berlingen, capturing more supplies, rations, ammunition, and maps pointing to additional American fuel depots. But those maps revealed a sobering truth. The Americans had fuel stockpiles everywhere. The 1st U.S. Army alone held 3.5 million gallons in reserve. Peiper pressed on to Ligue Neuville, where his troops would commit the Malmedy massacre. killing 84 American prisoners. Even this atrocity was tied to fuel. Peiper later claimed he lacked gasoline to transport prisoners, and so spared the fuel for tanks instead of men. That evening, his spearhead neared Stavelot, site of a massive American fuel depot containing more than 2 million gallons, enough to guarantee a drive to the Meuse. But Captain John Brewster of the U.S. 291st Engineer Combat Battalion had orders: deny the fuel at all costs. At 16:30, as Peiper's advance guard closed in, Brewster's men poured trails of gasoline through the depot. White phosphorus grenades were passed out. Technical Sergeant Paul Solis hurled the first. The blast ignited a firestorm. Within minutes, 15 acres of jerry cans roared like a furnace. A black column of smoke climbed 1,000 feet into the sky. Peiper's lead tanks arrived too late. For 3 days, the depot burned, consuming enough gasoline to have powered his division to Antwerp and back. One officer later recalled Peiper standing silently on his turret, watching the inferno. At last he climbed down, saying only, "They can afford to burn 2 million gallons just to deny it to us. What are we doing here?" Across the Ardennes, American engineers repeated the act. At Trois Ponts, 1.1 million gallons destroyed. At Spa, 2.5 million. In a single week, U.S. forces deliberately burned over 8 million gallons, more than Germany had allocated for the entire offensive. The scale of Allied supply was staggering. The Red Ball Express, a fleet of 6,000 trucks, delivered 412,000 tons of supplies, consuming more fuel than the entire German Army Group B received in a month. By December, the U.S. Motor Transport Service fielded 230 truck companies, moving 20,000 tons daily, including 3,000 tons of gasoline. Colonel James Snyder, 1st Army Logistics Chief, recorded calmly, fuel received, 1.8 million gallons. Fuel issued, 1.6 million. Net gain to reserves, 224,000 gallons. And beyond trucks lay pipelines. Operation Pluto pumped 1 million gallons per day under the channel. The Cherbourg-Paris line carried 800,000 gallons daily. Another line to the Seine added 650,000. By December 1944, Allied forces in northwest Europe were consuming 7.5 million gallons daily, while receiving 8.2 million. They were building reserves even as they advanced. Meanwhile, Peiper's battle group was bleeding fuel faster than it could capture it. On December the 18th, his maintenance officer recorded grimly, "By noon we had consumed 67,000 gallons since the offensive began. We had captured perhaps 55,000. We were operating at a deficit." American ultra-intercepts confirmed the weakness. Orders went out: destroy every depot at risk. That same day, US C-47S flew 316 sorties into Bastogne, delivering 160,000 gallons of fuel, more than Peiper's entire Kampfgruppe possessed. By December the 19th, tanks were being abandoned not from combat, but from empty fuel tanks. Peiper scraped together 8,000 gallons, enough for one engagement or one retreat, but not both. On December the 20th came the final blow: a radio report: fuel convoy destroyed by Allied aircraft, no resupply possible. Gathering his commanders, Peiper listened as one officer calculated: "We have fuel for 20 kilometers. The Meuse is 30 away." Peiper's reply was bitterly simple: "Gentlemen, we are fighting an enemy who burns more fuel to deny it to us than we receive for the entire operation. What we captured at Honsfeld, which seemed miraculous, was nothing to them. We cannot win." Peiper's realization spread quickly through the German command. General Hau von Manteuffel, leading 5th Panzer Army, later admitted, "When I learned the Americans destroyed 8 million gallons rather than risk capture, I knew the offensive had failed before it began." Others echoed the despair. Colonel Friedrich von der Heydt, captured on December the 23rd, told interrogators, "Your soldiers throw away chocolate. My men haven't seen chocolate in 2 years. You burn millions of gallons. We measure by the liter. How can we fight such abundance?" By December the 21st, Peiper was surrounded near Le Gleize. His tanks stood immobile, opposing him. The U.S. 30th Infantry Division, the 82nd Airborne, and the 3rd Armored together drew 340,000 gallons of fuel for that single day. Peiper had perhaps 1,000. An American private wrote home, "We've got Germans surrounded who ran out of gas." Our captain jokes we use more fuel, heating coffee than they have for tanks. The contrast in logistics was staggering. Patton's Third Army pivot north toward Bastogne, a maneuver the Germans considered impossible, required 350,000 gallons for redeployment, and was completed in 3 days. On December the 23rd, clear skies returned. Allied aircraft flew over 2,000 sorties. P-47s burned 300 gallons an hour, B-6 bombers to 100 gallons. In one day, the U.S. Air Force consumed more fuel than the entire German offensive had been allocated. That night, Peiper abandoned his vehicles and slipped out on foot. Of the 119 tanks and assault guns that began the offensive, 39 still functioned, but were drained of fuel. These were destroyed with remaining ammunition. One officer recalled, "We drained perhaps 200 gallons in total." The OBE or STU or MBA NNFHRE personally destroyed his command tank. Millions of Reichsmarks of equipment lost, not to enemy fire, but to empty tanks. Of the 5,000 men who set out with Peiper's battle group, only 770 returned. News of the fuel disparity shook German headquarters. On December the 26th, Field Marshal Walter Model Reed reports, 50,000 gallons captured at Honsfeld, 2 million burned at Stavelot, 8 million destroyed in total. He muttered, "We are not fighting the same war." Hitler refused to believe it. Albert Speer later wrote that, when shown photographs of Stavelot's inferno, Hitler dismissed them as Hollywood trickery. But officers at the front knew the truth. Letters revealed the despair. One SS officer told his wife, "Americans destroy more fuel daily than we receive monthly. They drive tanks as we march. This war is lost." Another soldier confessed, "They wash clothes in gasoline. They feed chocolate to dogs. We cannot fight infinity." The psychological blow was devastating. The myth of German superiority collapsed against the reality of American abundance. At Nuremberg, generals admitted fuel shortages had crippled every operation after 1942. Peiper himself testified, "Every decision after December the 17th was shaped by fuel shortage. We could not maneuver, pursue, or even retreat effectively. The Americans moved freely while we counted leaders." By war's end the numbers told the story. America built 324,000 aircraft, Germany 120,000. America produced 88,000 tanks, Germany 46,000. Most decisive of all, in 1940 for the United States refined 1.8 billion barrels of oil. Germany managed 33 million. December the 24th, 1944. As Peiper and his men slipped away on foot, leaving behind 39 tanks, 70 half-trucks, and 177 other vehicles, the reality of industrial war was undeniable. The Ardennes offensive had ended not with decisive battles, but with empty fuel tanks. They had captured 50,000 gallons at Honsfeld, a miracle to the Germans, yet meaningless to an enemy who could burn millions. One of Peiper's officers reflected in 1975, that morning, "Finding American fuel, we celebrated like we'd won the lottery." By evening, after learning about Stavelot burning, we understood we had already lost. Americans had so much they could destroy, what we would die to possess. The comparison was crushing. 50,000 gallons, the treasure of Honsfeld, was less than a single American armored division consumed in 2 days, less than the Red Ball Express burned in 3 hours. A rounding error in Allied daily consumption. Major General J. Lawton Collins later wrote, "The Germans assumed we valued fuel as they did, as irreplaceable. They couldn't comprehend we had so much we could burn millions rather than risk a tactical disadvantage." Operation Watch on the Rhine was doomed by the immutable mathematics of industrial war. The Ardennes offensive consumed roughly 2.8 million gallons. During the same period, American forces used 267 million, almost 100 times more. The Wehrmacht lost 100,000 men, 800 tanks, 1,000 aircraft, but most devastating of all, it lost its illusions. Peiper survived the war, imprisoned for war crimes until 1956. In 1967, he told historian Henry Lyman, "Finding that depot was the worst thing. If we'd run out earlier, we might have retreated with dignity. Instead, we discovered Americans had oceans while we had drops. We discovered impossibility." The lesson extended beyond 1944. In industrial war, logistics overwhelms tactics, production crushes courage, and abundance defeats dedication. German soldiers of 1944 were often better trained and more experienced, but it did not matter. The Americans fought with a machine so vast they wasted more than Germany could produce. In 1984, veterans gathered at Le Gleize. Peiper's Tiger tank still stood where it had run out of fuel. Former SS man Karl Wortmann stood beside former Staff Sergeant Roy Anderson of the U.S. 30th Infantry. Anderson asked why they had stopped. "We thought it was tactical." Wortmann laughed bitterly. "We stopped because the tanks were empty. You burned millions to keep it from us. How could we fight that?" German records tell the same story. Army Group B's War Diary, December the 16th. Offensive begins. Fuel at 70% of minimum. December the 17th, 50,000 gallons captured. December the 18th, multiple depots destroyed, 5 million gallons lost. December the 24th, Peiper abandons his vehicles. Fuel exhaustion. Meanwhile, U.S. First Army records, December the 16th, reserves, 3.7 million gallons. December the 18th, 1.8 million gallons received. December the 24th, reserves, 4.1 million. The numbers spoke louder than propaganda. One German soldier wrote, "We marched past abandoned American trucks left idling for warmth. They left engines running. We walked in the snow." Doctors testified that men died in field hospitals because there was no fuel to move ambulances 10 kilometers. The psychological blow was total. Soldiers who had been told Americans were weak now saw them casually destroy more fuel than Germany possessed. Gohl's diary admitted serious morale problems. Letters home confessed the truth: "We cannot fight infinity." General Alfred Jodl later testified, "After the Ardennes, we knew it was lost. We had played our last card, and the enemy held all the aces." By February 1945, Germany's fuel production collapsed entirely. The Luftwaffe was grounded, tanks abandoned, the army immobilized. When the end came in spring, many German units did not surrender from defeat in battle, but from the silence of empty engines. Entire panzer divisions sat powerless while Allied columns rolled past. Generalmajor Fritz Bahlen later described the scene: "We had 42 operational tanks, experienced crews, and full ammunition loads. But we had 300 liters of fuel, not enough to reach the next town. We destroyed our tanks and walked into captivity." The contrast was unbearable. American advances were slowed only by traffic jams caused by too many vehicles. Patton's Third Army alone commanded more than 15,000 vehicles. For Peiper's battle group, the crisis was not courage or skill, but fuel. His desperate struggle revealed how industrial capacity, not tactics, would decide the war. On that December morning at Honsfeld, standing among captured jerrycans, Peiper glimpsed the truth. He faced an enemy whose waste exceeded his army's need. The numbers told the story. The entire German allocation for the Ardennes offensive was 5 million gallons. The Americans deliberately destroyed 8 million, rather than risk losing it. U.S. forces consumed 7.5 million gallons every single day. Peiper's prize at Honsfeld, 50,000 gallons, amounted to just 0.6% of American daily supply. The Battle of the Bulge claimed 19,000 American lives, and perhaps 100,000 German. It broke the Wehrmacht's last reserves, but its most lasting impact was psychological, the realization spreading through German ranks that America's abundance was incomprehensible. Victory, Peiper discovered, was no longer won by brilliant maneuver or individual valor. It belonged to the side that produced more oil, more steel, more aluminum. By those measures, Germany never had a chance. The irony cut deep. At Le Gleize, where Peiper abandoned his force, American engineers catalogued the wreckage. Among it were 39 Tiger and Panther tanks, perfectly functional, except their fuel gauges sat at zero. Major Robert Harrison filed a blunt salvage report. Required fuel, 8,000 gallons. Source: Local Reserve. Time, 4 hours. For Germany, 8,000 gallons would have meant survival for their best armored formation. For the Americans, it was a routine draw from local depots, scarcely noticed, barely recorded. Entire panzer divisions sat powerless while Allied columns rolled past. Generalmajor Fritz Ballen later described the scene. We had 42 operational tanks, experienced crews, and full ammunition loads, but we had 300 liters of fuel, not enough to reach the next town. We destroyed our tanks and walked into captivity. The contrast was unbearable. American advances were slowed only by traffic jams caused by too many vehicles. Patton's Third Army alone commanded more than 15,000 vehicles. For Peiper's battle group, the crisis was not courage or skill, but fuel. His desperate struggle revealed how industrial capacity, not tactics, would decide the war. On that December morning at Honsfeld, standing among captured jerrycans, Peiper glimpsed the truth. He faced an enemy whose waste exceeded his army's need. The numbers told the story. The entire German allocation for the Ardennes offensive was 5 million gallons. The Americans deliberately destroyed 8 million, rather than risk losing it. U.S. forces consumed 7.5 million gallons every single day. Peiper's prize at Honsfeld, 50,000 gallons, amounted to just 0.6% of American daily supply. The Battle of the Bulge claimed 19,000 American lives, and perhaps 100,000 German. It broke the Wehrmacht's last reserves, but its most lasting impact was psychological, the realization spreading through German ranks that America's abundance was incomprehensible. Victory, Peiper discovered, was no longer won by brilliant maneuver or individual valor. It belonged to the side that produced more oil, more steel, more aluminum. By those measures, Germany never had a chance. The irony cut deep. At La Gleize, where Peiper abandoned his force, American engineers catalogued the wreckage. Among it were 39 Tiger and Panther tanks, perfectly functional, except their fuel gauges sat at zero. Major Robert Harrison filed a blunt salvage report. Required fuel, 8,000 gallons. Source: Local Reserve. Time, 4 hours. For Germany, 8,000 gallons would have meant survival for their best armored formation. For the Americans, it was a routine draw from local depots, scarcely noticed, barely recorded.